Good morning. My name is Mel Hartley, and I am one of the team here at the Training Accreditation Council. And I would like to welcome you to this webinar on training product equivalence. This is one of our new format Chat with TAC webinars, where we will start with a presentation, followed by an opportunity for you to ask questions. We would like to take a moment at this time to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to the life of this city and this region. Now I'd like to introduce Claire Werner, who is our presenter for today. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks, Mel, and good morning, everyone. I can see lots of familiar names in the chat box, so hello to those of you that I do know. For those of you that I don't know, I look forward to spending the next half an hour with you where we're talking about training product equivalence. So in our session today, we're going to look at a few key topics related to equivalence in the first 15 minutes of the session. And then, as Mel mentioned, we'll open up the session to you for any questions that you would like to ask. Because it is such a short format and time frame, we're going to just touch on those key points, but also point you to where there's some more information that can help you around the things that we're talking about. So we plan to talk about the meaning of equivalence for both qualifications and units of competency, what you need to do as an RTO when a training package version, a new training package version is released, the actions that you might take for transition and teach out processes, mapping processes that you might use as an RTO, and all importantly, where you might find some more information. So let's start with getting on the same page with what equivalence actually means. So when a unit of competency is determined to be equivalent to the unit that it supersedes, it actually means that the work outcome that's described by that unit of competency is the same, or it's unchanged. So in essence, those things are functionally equivalent. And what the training package developers do is that they go through a mapping process, and this has been in place since 2019, where they map the two units together. So they look at the knowledge and skills and the elements and performance criteria. And when those things align, then we say the unit is equivalent. If those things don't align, then the unit is determined to be not equivalent. And when you look at your training package on training.gov and you look at the units, you'll see when it's been superseded, whether it's been determined equivalent or not equivalent. Now, when a qualification is determined to be equivalent, what it means is that the occupational outcome and or the AQF level for that qualification is unchanged. And so again, if there has been a change, then that qualification would be determined not equivalent. So when it comes to units of competency and qualifications, determining whether something is equivalent or not equivalent can also be impacted by a few other things. That might be things like licensing, it might be regulatory requirements, legislation, or potentially even certification requirements. So when you're looking for the detail of the changes in the units and qualification, what you're going to find is that there's a whole lot of mapping information that sits in the companion volume for your training package. So you can see the changes that have been made for the versions of the unit there. You can also see detailed changes that have been made by looking at the compare function on training.gov, and we are going to have a look at an example of that. When a new version of a training product that's on your scope is released, if that training product is equivalent, then the regulators, that's TAC and ASCA and the VRQA, are all going to add that to your scope automatically. If it's not equivalent, you have to use the amendment to scope process to add that new training product to your scope. But it doesn't really matter whether it's equivalent and it's been added to your scope automatically or not equivalent and you're applying for it. In all circumstances, there's actually some obligations that RTOs have to get ready to actually deliver that new training product. So on this slide, we have a list of all of the things that RTOs are obliged to do when a new training product comes onto their scope. So you have to make sure that you market that training product to your potential clients in an accurate and ethical manner. And that means that you tell them all the things that they need to know and understand to be able to make an informed choice about whether that's the right training product for them. And we have to make sure, of course, that that marketing is in line with your strategy for delivery and assessment. That has to be suitable for the learner groups that you are aiming to deliver to. And you have to make sure that that tells the story of what it is you're going to do, because that's the guiding document for your trainers and assessors. You have to make sure that you've got all of the training resources, equipment and facilities that you need to deliver that new unit or qualification. And sometimes you'll find that there are things that are in there, things that have changed with industry, and your industry engagement processes will tell you that, about how things are done or what they are done with. And they're the kinds of things you need to make sure that you build in to the processes in getting ready for delivery of this new qualification. You have to have all of your assessment resources and tools. So that might mean, for example, that you might have to write some new scenarios, you might have to adjust questions or practical tasks that you might be doing. You need to make sure that you have got the right kind of support services that are available to your student cohort. And it's really important to tell people what you can do for them, and equally important to tell them what is not possible for your organisation to do. You have to make sure that what you are offering in this new training product is relevant to current industry practice. And we've got a couple of clauses in our regulation that are about that. That's 1.5 and 1.6. So again, that is your industry engagement processes and how you make sure that what you're offering is actually how industry does those tasks today. You have to make sure that you've got staff who are vocationally competent and industry current. And a lot of the things that you have done in the previous 6 things that we've looked at there are going to tell you whether you have got anything that you need to do to help your staff get up to date. Sometimes in these changes, there's some little gaps that might need to be addressed through a little bit of training or maybe some visits to industry. You have to have a plan for validation for the new training product. And of course, when something is new, you're wanting to make sure early on that in fact it's working as you intended it to do. So before you conduct assessment, you're going to do a pre-assessment validation, and you're going to make sure that those assessment tools look like they're going to work. And then after you've delivered, you're going to do post-assessment validation to make sure that they worked as you intended them to. And of course, you have to make sure that you have a plan for the transition of students from any old training product to the new training product. So this primarily impacts qualifications. When you have very short courses, units of competency, typically you don't have to transition students. But when you have qualifications that you're delivering, which can sometimes go over 12 to 18 months, then you might find that there'll be some students who start on the old qualification and need to transition to the new one. So how that is going to happen and keeping people informed of that process is a really important thing for you to do. To be able to achieve all 9 of those things, in essence, you need to make sure that you have gone through some kind of review process with the training package, and there are some key things that you're looking for. So things like changes to the structure of the qualifications, changes to the way the training or assessment must occur, and this might be, it might have been able to be simulated, but now it has to be conducted in the workplace or vice versa. Changes to the teaching, learning and assessment tools that you have to do, changes to what has to be included in the assessment. So it might say, for example, You have to do things 3 times, 4 times in these contexts, and a number of training packages put that kind of specification in their performance evidence. And sometimes you can also have changes to the requirements for trainers and assessors. And this might be around the currency that they have, or it could be around the qualifications that they have. And there are a number of qualifications training packages where they do put additional requirements on top of the standards for RTO requirements for trainers and assessors. So a little earlier I said that training.gov is one way that you can look for the detail of changes. They have a function that is called Compare Training Component Content. This is what it looks like on training.gov. So what you can do is you can choose to compare selected releases of units of competency. So in this case, the left-hand unit is the current unit, and the column that sits on the right-hand side of this screen are previous versions that you can then compare to. So you can choose those and then press the compare button, and what you will see is something that looks like this. The red text that's been highlighted red, that is the text that is in the new unit, and it's not in the old unit. And the black text is the text that is in the old unit, but not in the new unit. So this can be a little bit difficult to read at times. I certainly find it a little bit difficult to read, but once you get the hang of it, it's actually quite easy to see what's happening. Now we've got a little bit there that's highlighted in green, has a green circle around it in Performance Criteria 2.2. And what you'll find is that the old unit had text in it that said select, wear and care for PPE, but the new unit actually reads quite differently. So even though this unit is equivalent, what you'll find is as an RTO, you actually need to have a look at this and say, okay, that's not there. Is it somewhere else in the unit? And for this unit, in fact, what you'll find is that there are other performance criteria that actually have this in it. So in this unit, select and wearing PPE is actually in 1.7 now instead of here. And caring for it is in 5.3, which is cleaning and maintaining the serviceability of all plant and equipment used. So sometimes it doesn't read like it's there anymore, but it's in other places. So as an RTO, you have to make sure that you've done that analysis and you understand where everything is. Now, in the fact sheet that you have been given, there are 2 examples in that fact sheet that show you how that mapping could be done. We'll look at example 2 first because that is on page 3 of that fact sheet. And what you will see there is the bits that have been highlighted are the bits that are actually very different in these 2 versions of the unit. This unit comes out of the CPC training package, and these units are equivalent. But when you actually have a look at what's different, there are a number of things there that you as an RTO would have to take into account in the way you taught this unit and the way you assess the unit. The next example is on pages 6 and 7. And when you have a look at those, again, you'll see that this is a common unit that many RTOs use. And what you'll see there is what has been changed, but there's been like an additional column added in here where they've said, well, what does this actually mean for our RTO? So when you look at element 1 and the changes that are there, in the analysis that the RTO has done, they've decided that it's really just a wording change and there's no change in the meaning of this element or performance criteria. When you have a look at the changes that are on the next page, however, you will see that there are significant things that RTO actually needs to consider and decide what to do about. So for element 3 and element 4, in both cases, they have decided that they need to review training and assessment materials and include particular things in there, and they have allocated an action. So this is a really nice way to see what kinds of things the RTO is doing to meet their obligations for training and assessment. So that's a great fact sheet for you to have a look at, and there's a lot of information in there that supports thinking about how you can map your units. We've got a couple of clauses that are about transition and teach out, and again, they are about when a training package is superseded or where a training package, training product is deleted. And there's some timeframes that sit around that are standardised for every RTO. When you've got a superseded training product, our timeframe for either finishing people or transitioning to the new training package, new training product is 1 year. When a training product is deleted, we have 2 years to actually certify or transfer that student into a new training product. There are times when the regulators extend these transition timeframes, and the regulators publish that information on their websites. That extension to transition time is actually about the things that an industry area, a group of RTOs have said, actually, we can't manage that, and to not disadvantage the students, we need a bit more time. And that is the application that is then made to the regulator and considered, and that's when you get an extension to transition time. So what we haven't talked about is credit, and this is something else that is impacted by equivalence. The reason we haven't talked about that today is because it's a huge topic and we just don't have enough time to do it. We're already a couple of minutes over time. But TAC has a whole series of talks, webinars, infographics, and fact sheets for you that will help you with credit. And as you can see, Mel's been putting those links to those fact sheets in the chat box. So I would encourage you, if you have questions about credit, to have a look at those resources. And if you have questions, come to the next credit talk. So we also have a whole lot of other resources that are available for you to access about this topic. So you can look at the standards for RTOs in the user's guide. That is available there for RTOs. You have a number of fact sheets that are available to you, training product equivalence. We also have a TAC clip that talks about training package changes. There's a TAC talk, episode 9, that's a podcast that you can access. Your amendment to registration application guide has also got some information in it. And we have some fact sheets around transition and teach out and awarding credit. So there's lots of help out there if you need it. And of course, you can always pick up the phone to TAC and your case manager, and they are also there to help. So now we get to the fun bit where you might have questions for us. We do have a couple of questions that have come in before the session, which we are going to answer. But if you have any questions that have come out of the information that we've given you this morning, please use the chat box to type your questions in. And while you're doing that, I will just answer the first of these questions. So the first one was, I teach in a number of RTOs. Why can't I use the equivalence mapping that I have done across all of these RTOs? And this is actually a really good question, because equivalence, when we're talking about trainers and assessors, we're typically talking about vocational competence. And that's a process that's actually unique to each RTO. So the mapping you do as a training and assessment, as a trainer and assessor, is your idea of how what you have done lines up with the unit of competency. The process that is then unique is the process that the RTO goes through to have a look at what you have presented and to make a decision that's good for that RTO about whether they think you're vocationally competent or not. And of course, it's an auditable process in every RTO. So you might find that the mapping that you've done is a mapping that you could take with you and show to different RTOs, but each RTO would have to go through their own process of verifying the things that you have said there and making a decision about whether they think your evidence demonstrates that you are vocationally competent. That's why it's not transferable between RTOs. And Mel's put a fact sheet in there that will help you with that. The second question that we've got here is, I think, probably something we have already touched on or answered. And this question says, if it's equivalent on TGA, why do I need to do anything else to prove my competence? And so I think some of those examples that we have looked at might help answer this. Remembering that when TGA says a unit is equivalent or a qualification is equivalent, it's about the work outcome or the vocational outcome, not necessarily the content of the training and assessment. So when you look at what you need to do to be able to teach and assess, there can be differences in those units. Sometimes they're very minor, sometimes there are no differences, but sometimes there are actually quite substantial differences as well. So your obligation is to have a look at those changes, and we've showed you a way that you can do that quite easily this morning with the compare function. So have a look at those changes and then make a decision about what that means for you as a trainer and assessor. Does it mean I have a little gap which I need to fill, or does it mean everything's actually covered, it's just kind of reorganised in a different way? So equivalence is about work outcome, vocational outcome. For training and assessment purposes, you still go through that process of having a look at what's there, so we make sure that you know everything that you need to know to teach it, and you can do everything that you need to be able to do to train and assess. This is information about how you can give us feedback about the session. There's a SurveyMonkey link there that you can click on and provide feedback, respond to the questions that we have put there. You've also got information about upcoming events. So that's a link to our professional development calendar. We have a whole range of different things that are available there for you as an RTO. And of course, we have our YouTube channel and our TAC talks, and you can subscribe to our newsletter. So we would really love to hear from you with any suggestions that you have about how we could do what we're doing today better, but also any other information that you might think would be useful to you as an RTO that TAC could consider as a part of their professional development program. So thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, wherever you are in Australia, to join us for our session. We hope you have found it useful, and we look forward to seeing you again soon in another session like this.